Put your hands in the air, step away from the vehicle. Have a good day.
You too.
In the year 2005, in Peoria, Illinois, Earl, an elderly horticulturist, wins an award at a National Daylily League convention. The day of the convention is also his daughter Iris's wedding, but he doesn't go. Instead, he prioritizes growing plants over her because they don't talk back. Meanwhile, Iris waits for Earl to show up, but her mother, Mary, tells her to face the facts that her father had never been there during the important parts of her life, from her baptism to graduation, to countless birthdays, and even their anniversaries. 12 years later, Earl's flower business fails as he loses his home and livelihood. His workers help him pack a few of his properties into his pickup truck as he pays them off. With nowhere to go, he decides to see his granddaughter, Ginny, who's now about to get married, so he joins them at the pre-wedding brunch. On getting there, Ginny is excited to see Earl, but Mary and Iris are not. Iris says she's not going to be there if her dad is there, and Mary sees his truck with his properties and laments that he's not really here for Ginny's wedding, but only because he has nowhere else to go. She questions him about his promise to pay for Ginny's wedding, and asks him how he's going to pay for it now. Earl apologizes to Jean and leaves.
Things make everyone crazy.
But he's stopped by Richard, the friend of a bridesmaid. They engage in small talk as Earl tells him about his love for driving and never having a traffic ticket. Richard tells him about a driving job and gives him the address. Earl looks at him in doubt, but he takes the address. The next day, Earl drives to the tire shop in the address, and some men open the garage door for him to come in. They put a mini travel bag in the truck and give Earl a burner phone, telling him to pick up whenever it rings. They ask him if he knows how to text, but he just shrugs. Next, they give him the address to a hotel where he is to park, leave his keys in the glove compartment, and step out for an hour. By the time he'll get back, he'll see his pay and keys in the glove compartment. Before leaving, they warn him not to look into the bag. Meanwhile, at a DEA office building in Chicago, Warren Lewis welcomes Agent Bates, who has just been assigned to his team. Warren urges him to work hard, make cases, and a name of himself. Walking out of Warren's office, Bates meets Agent Trevino and shakes hands with him, telling him they're going to be working together. The next day, Earl gets to the hotel and does as instructed. When he gets back to the truck, he sees the money and smiles. A man knocks on his window and gives him a number to call whenever he needs the job. Earl says it's a one-time deal, but the man insists he should keep it just in case he changes his mind. Later that day, Trevino and Bates ambush Luis, who works for the cartel at a nail salon, telling him there is a search warrant for his house and he is going to be their mole. 2 days later, at Ginny's wedding reception dinner, Jan gives his speech, thanking her grandmother, Iris, and Earl.
And covered the open bar.
Earl goes to sit beside Mary, trying to reminisce about old times, saying they can still be civil and ask her to dance. But Mary refuses because she's still unhappy with him. She confronts him about his hobby, and the old man rants on about the beauty and uniqueness of flowers. Mary is disgusted that he can't apply the same energy to his family. The following week, Earl arrives at the tire shop with a fancy new truck. The men admire his new ride, then they load up the truck with the package before handing him another burner. As usual, he's to follow the same rules. The clueless old man shows them the previous phone, saying it's perfectly okay, but they break it and tell him phones become useless after every run. Meanwhile, in an interrogation room, Bates tells Luis that his case is not looking good, based on the things that were found in his house. Bates advises him to work with them. After much deliberation, Luis agrees. After completing his second run, Earl is able to pay to get back his house and farm. Earl goes to visit his friend's bar. On getting there, He sees that there had been a fire that burned the kitchen. His friend complains to him about how much this is going to affect the business, except someone with 25 grand to spare helps him out. Hearing this, Earl is moved, so he chooses to go for a third run. A week later at the tire shop, the men load the truck with a bigger bag than usual, and remind Earl about the rules to make sure he isn't senile. As Earl drives, he glances at the bag, wondering what's inside, because every run he makes, he's given a bigger bag to deliver. Unable to tame his curious mind, he pulls over to check it. He opens the bag and sees it stuffed with cocaine, so he exclaims. Suddenly he hears footsteps, so he turns back, and to his surprise, he sees a police officer walking towards him. The police officer asks him if there's any issue, but Earl makes up a lie. The cop's dog suddenly starts barking from the police car, so the officer assumes it wants to pee. Sensing that the dog was probably barking because of the smell of the drugs, Earl quickly gets into the truck and applies a reasonable sum of analgesic cream into his hands. Just before the dog could sniff the bag, he pats its head and nose, trying to mask the smell of the drugs. The officer then walks back to Earl, apologizing on behalf of the dog, and tells him to drive safely. At the same time, Luis meets up with agents Bates and Trevino. Bates tells him he's going to have to prove his value to be able to get witness protection. Luis explains that the drugs are being moved by different mules who drive to different hotels and park for about an hour. He reveals the whole process to Bates. The week after, Earl goes for his fourth run. He jams music and has already become a specialist at his job. A few weeks later, somewhere in Mexico, the main cartel boss, Laton, skeet shoots. One of his men named Julio comes to see him after being called. He tells Julio that Tata, which is the code name for Earl, is going to make a full run, this time with 110 kilos of cocaine, and he's going to follow him through to the drop-off. That evening at the tire shop, Julio tells Earl that he is going to be carrying something very valuable for his 8th run, and he should follow everything he says because he doesn't trust him. Julio also brings out a gun to threaten him, but Earl says he's been in combat before, and he's not intimidated by him. Surprised to see the men acting all chummy with Earl, Julio shouts at them to load the truck. He then tells Earl that mules don't talk. While Earl asks one of the men to show him how to text the drop site, Julio hides a listening device in Earl's truck. On the way, Earl stops to help out a couple who have a flat tire, to the dismay of Julio. That night, Earl stops at a motel for the night and enjoys a good time with 2 ladies, and it pisses Julio off. The next day, while on the road, Julio loses track of Earl for a short while. Shortly after Earl gets to the new drop-off location, the men there do not seem to be aware of his arrival. Julio eventually locates Earl, who gets into an argument with the men, but they finally relax after hearing Julio's full name. Julio then asks Earl who gave him this address, but Earl is unable to describe the guy as the men offload the truck. Furious at Earl, Julio calls Lawton to complain that Earl doesn't follow any instructions at all and keeps making stops along the way. But Lawton tells him all the runs have been successful, so he should cut Tata some slack and stay with him. Luis, on the other hand, meets with Trevino and Bates. He gives them a freight manifest with code names of all the mules, with the number of kilos of cocaine they've been able to deliver. He tells them about Tata, who has successfully delivered about 300 kilos in 2 months. The next week on the 9th run, they stop by a roadside restaurant for brunch.
No more stopping, Tata.
About getting back on the road after brunch, a police officer stops Julio, but Earl tells the officer that Julio is just working for him, helping him move. Earl gives the police officer 2 jars of caramelized corn, saying he got it from charity. The police officer accepts the jars and walks away. Meanwhile, Bates meets with Warren, informing him that the top mule is on his way to a drop-off, and they know the route and time it'll take before his arrival. He adds that he plans to inform local law enforcement to make random stops and check cars that fit the description. Warren agrees and gives Bates a go-ahead. Later that day at the drop-off location, the men tell Earl he's broken a record of 232 kilos in one load and that Leighton is very happy and wants to meet him. The next day, Earl is taken to Laton, who welcomes him warmly, and they party till midnight. The next morning, Earl sits with Julio and advises him to quit. Julio refuses, saying Laton pulled him off the streets when he was nothing, and that this is his family.
I'm gonna go up to my room.
Later that day, Warren's team is queried about the lack of busts in bringing down the cartel, so Bates suggests that they bust an alleged stash house that might be receiving shipments in a couple of days. They have to make it look like the work of a local PD to the cartel. A couple of days later, the officers make the bust, arrest a few men, and retrieve some cocaine. Days later at Ginny's graduation as a glam cosmetologist, Earl arrives, but Mary and Iris are not happy to see him, but he tells them that he was invited. Upon seeing him, Ginny smiles at him. Mary, on the other hand, asks him why he's even here, but he says he's trying to make up for lost time. Meanwhile, Lawton while away his time skeet shooting, oblivious that his men are no longer happy with him because they feel he's becoming too lenient, so one of them shoots him from behind. Shortly after, Gustavo tells Julio that Laton is gone, and he couldn't handle his deficiencies with the DEA closing in on them, so he killed him. Gustavo says that he's the new boss, he won't accept any tardiness, and everything must go according to plan. He also adds that Tata should be introduced to the new crew, so he'll know they're not joking. The next day, Julio pulls up with two men at a restaurant, and tells Earl there's a change of plans, and he's to follow them. They drive deep into the woods before pulling over. The man in the truck points a gun at Earl, ordering him to get out. They inform Earl that there are new rules, he has to follow the schedule religiously, or else they'll make him disappear. They open the trunk of the car to show him a dead mule who didn't follow orders and was shot. To show they mean business, they give Earl a phone he's to keep with him at all times. The next week, Earl returns to the tire shop to make a 12th run. Meanwhile, at the DEA's office, Bates tells Warren they know the exact route of Tata, but he and Trevino will go this time around making stops in an undercover vehicle instead of the local PD. Bates also says they'll need to pull the plug on the whole thing and need an aircraft for air surveillance. As usual, Warren gives him the go-ahead. Later that day, on Earl's route, Bates and Trevino observe every black truck they come across. A few minutes later, they pull over a guy in a black truck that looks suspicious. They check him, search the truck, see nothing of interest, and lets him go. Bates then calls Brown, who's flying the aircraft, if he sees anything, but Brown tells him he hasn't. Luis calls Bates, giving him new information on Tata, the location of a motel he's going to stop at for the night, with permission from his handler. Luis asks if this is finally going to prove his worth, and Bates says they'll see how it goes. That night, Bates and his team monitor the motel, looking for anyone that fits the description of who they have in mind. Down the hall from Earl's room, Earl sees a huge guy who keeps banging the ice machine while staring at his phone. He walks up to the guy and tells him the ice machine will work better if he drops his phone. The guy shuns Earl, saying he doesn't need advice from an old-timer. As Earl walks away, Bates and his team notices a gun tucked in the guy's jeans. Then Bates decides to check it out. Earl sees Bates also on his phone and wonders why the younger generation can't stop doom-scrolling. Bates smiles and puts his phone in his pocket before going to the guy's room door. Bates acts like he mistook the room for his own. The man opens the door angrily and tries to fight, but Bates subdues and arrests him. They search his room and see only a few grams of cocaine. Then they realize he's not who they are after. Meanwhile, Earl peers through his window and sees police cars. He then realizes the person he last spoke to was also a cop. The next morning, Earl goes into a coffee shop near the motel with a small flask and sees Bates. He overhears his complaint about missing his anniversary. Earl commends him on how he took the guy down last night, and Bates apologizes for any disturbances. Earl advises him to put family before work and shouldn't follow his footsteps of being the king of missing important things. He also tells a brief
That's the first one I've missed, so.
story of what led to his daughter not talking to him for 12 years. Earl pays for his coffee and leaves forgetting his flask, but Bates runs and hands it to him. While on the route to the drop-off location, Ginny calls Earl and tells him that Mary has cancer, and she's been sent home from the hospital because she could die at any moment. But if they had brought her a year ago, things would be different. Ginny asks him to come home immediately, but Earl tells her he has a tight schedule and won't be able to make it. Ginny gets mad at him and tells him how she's been sticking up for him for all these years. She learns the hard way that she was wrong about him, so she hangs up the phone. A few hours later, Earl shows up at the house to see Mary, but they are all surprised to see him. Earl sees Mary looking very pale and apologizes for everything he's done and says he's here now. Mary adds that for some reason she's glad he came. At the same time, men are out looking for Earl, trying to contact him, but he ignores their calls and messages. Later that day, Iris finally talks to Earl, and they have a civil conversation.
I think you're just a late bloomer.
Meanwhile, Warren tells Bates that they're running out of time to nail the cartel. That night, Earl makes peace with Mary just before she dies. A few days later, Mary is buried. After the burial, Iris invites Earl to the house for Thanksgiving, and Earl says he wouldn't miss it for the world. Earl decides to get back en route, stops by a petrol station to use the restroom. While coming out, he's roughly handled by Gustavo's men. They ask him where he's been, and he informs them about Mary's passing. He also says he knows he went missing, and they can end him if he wants to. The men call Gustavo, telling him about what Earl had said, but Gustavo furiously says Earl broke the rules. He orders them to kill the geezer once he completes the drop. While the call was on, Bates and his team, who have wiretapped the line, listen in so they track the location and move quickly. They surround Earl and arrest him. Bates decides to talk to him, and Earl says he's happy to have made peace with his family before Mary died. A few days later, Earl is tried in court. His lawyer tries to defend him, but he pleads guilty and is remanded to a federal prison. Earl and his family have an emotional moment before he is taken away. Months later, Earl tends to the flower garden in prison. The end. Thank you for sticking to the end of my video. Please do me the biggest favor by leaving a like, comment, and subscribe. And I hope to see you in the next video.